welcome to another Secret Influence TV interview. I interview people who have expertise to share to help you have more success and be a better influencer, or people who have an incredible, powerful, inspiring story. And I am very excited to interview Mark Goddard, the author of Losing Eldorado. So, welcome, Mark, to Secret Influence TV.
Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Great, yeah, great, thanks. So just I'd start, I saw in your sort of bio, you have your description of yourself as writer, artist, designer, and musician. Um, which, if you had to, choose one, what would you say you are, or are you all
I
those
would
things?
describe myself as an artist primarily. I think it's a bit of a cop out in so much as that it encompasses all of those things. Um, an artist. I've always felt that I studied architecture. I studied art before, but I always felt that music was just a different type of medium. Um, Creativity is creativity, and people express themselves in different ways. But yeah, I mean, it's taken a long time for me to come to the conclusion and describe myself as an artist. But I do a lot of photography. I paint, I draw, I play the guitar, sing. I write books. So it's the whole thing really. So yeah, artist I think encompasses all of that.
Yeah, no, you're very clearly very creative and got a very sort of musical background. I was looking at your sort of synopsis, and you were saying how your when you were young, your mother ran a charity jazz band called Dr. Jazz.
My dad was Dr. Jazz. He
Oh, your
basically
dad. Okay,
my mum sang with my dad.
okay, fantastic.
My dad wrote. He did radiologist, a
Okay,
doctor. He raised money for charity, put MRI scanners in Bristol. But as I was growing up, or since from the day I was born, he was running this band. So it's a sort of a trad jazz slash country and western soul, whole load of different smorgasbord of styles. But he wrote a lot of the songs himself, and yeah, he wrote some charity singles which raised money for charity, and he got on television back in the 80s. Um,
incredible. So from a very young age, music was obviously a big
yeah, I
influence in
mean,
your life, and I guess live music as well. Particularly, you must have.
absolutely. I mean, like, it's funny people go, "What was your first concert?" And I was like, I mean, I don't know because I was, from the age of 0, I was the baby in the pram whilst they were performing.
Sure.
I haven't seen it for years, but there's a clip of me at the age of 3 beating a drum from a television report, and it's very cute. But it's all to do with the jazz band. But yeah. I grew up listening to my dad and mum playing, live music.
Sure. And as a, do you play an instrument yourself? Do you sing? What's
Yeah,
your
yeah.
sort
So I was trained on the piano, but I play the
Okay.
guitar,
Okay.
and I sing a little bit as well. But I'm primarily when I perform, I'm primarily a guitar player.
Okay.
Um, but I do play the piano as well.
Okay. Fantastic. And this is all sort of pre-logged to the book, which we can talk about, which is called Losing Eldorado, and very much a journey, a road trip, but also a journey into music. So, do you want to perhaps just describe the book in a couple of sentences? What
Yeah, it's a travelogue, I suppose, but it's a deep dive into I call it a love letter to American popular music, the automobile, and American culture, I suppose.
Sure.
Primarily, yeah, it's a retrospective look on something which happened a long time ago. So 20 odd years ago, I went around America in a Cadillac with my brother. We worked out it was the cheapest way to get across America was to buy a car rather than renting. You can't even rent a car and go beyond maybe 2 or 3 states, often with
Sure.
rental cars. So we found out that if you bought a car, and back then in 2002, it was a lot cheaper than it is now to go around America. So we bought a car for $1,500. It turned out to be a Cadillac. That was never something
Sure.
we intended, but we ended up buying this Cadillac, and we were going over there primarily to seek the roots of the music that we grew up loving and playing as kids, and hearing about these places on Bourbon Street and Beale Street and St. Louis Blues, and these were just mythical places to us, which had
Sure.
absolutely no relevance to an actual place. But in America, there's always been a tradition, well, for the last 150 years, of writing songs about places. Um, and they're real places and real stuff happens and there's real culture. And America has, each different city has its own different musical culture, which is quite distinct from one to the other. So there's a big contrast between, say, Nashville and Memphis, and yet they're both in Tennessee.
So
So
you,
yeah.
yeah, so you obviously you planned your trip from the UK, and then and
Well,
then
yeah, I mean, we
you
kind of did. I mean, I think I do believe very much in, if you are traveling, well, it depends entirely what you're doing. If you're obviously going for a work job and you're
sure,
going out traveling for a very short space of time, it's very good to have a sort of set itinerary. But when you're sort of traveling for traveling's sake, it's often nice not to have a very clear
sure,
or direct, like, this is where we need to be tonight. We had a very, very schematic aim, which was we'd met some family friends and they said, come to Boston. You can stay in Boston, look for a car, and then go from there. So we had that, and then we were like, we need to get to New Orleans. So we were going from Boston, which is like, New England, where the where it all sort of erupted, where America came about, Boston Tea Party and all that sort of stuff. And then we were going to New Orleans, and we were going to New Orleans because New Orleans is the home of, jazz, the
sure.
blues, you know, American popular music, really. So our quest was to get to New Orleans, and then when we got to New Orleans, it was a question of where do we go now?
Sure, sure. A long list of places, I imagine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it must be hard to decide. There must, yeah, I mean,
yeah.
genuinely must have had a long
Well, we
list of places to visit.
well we did, we did. But it's funny. It was really. I mean, the traditional route would be. I mean, everyone always asked us, "Did you go across the desert? Did you go to LA? Did you go on high? Did you go on Route 66?" We did, but we didn't. So the original Route 66 goes from Chicago to LA. That's what Route 66 is. But we were doing a slightly different route in that we were going from Boston down through New Connecticut and through into New York, and then New York to Philadelphia, Washington, and then into the Appalachian Mountains, and then down through Tennessee, and then into the Delta, and then down to New Orleans. So that route doesn't include anything to do with Route 66 whatsoever.
Right.
Um, but we had a choice when we got to New Orleans. We were like, what do we do? Do we go left or right? Do we go towards Florida? Because there's places like Savannah, which is, Chattanooga, Mobile, Alabama. There are
Sure.
places in Muscle Shoals is in Alabama. There are places we could have gone, and we thought, do we go that way or do we keep going west? I think if the car had probably had if it was capable, we might have gone across the desert, because that's sort of the I don't know, the ideal American road trip is you go across the
Sure.
desert. We knew that the car just wouldn't make it, basically.
Right. Okay.
Um, but instead, we went towards this place, Austin, Texas, which at the time I knew nothing of. I was only 18. My brother was
Sure.
22. So he was kind of leading it. And we'd heard that Austin, Texas was this great music town. From people on the road, they were like, are you guys going to Austin? And we're like, yeah,
Sure.
yeah. But I knew nothing of it. All we had was a rough guide and a Lonely Planet.
Okay.
Um, it was a time before the internet as such. Like, the internet did exist, obviously, in 2002,
Sure.
but it wasn't like it is now. You didn't book accommodation on the internet.
Sure.
The maps were still analog maps,
Sure.
no Google Maps, no
Mm.
smartphones. We had a
Yeah.
very rudimentary phone.
Sure.
Um, and when we went to go into a place to stay, we'd just drive up to a motel or,
Sure.
stay in the car.
Yeah. No, of course.
But yeah,
So
we ended up going back towards Chicago, basically.
and I know in your book you talk about you saw so many great bands and you met so many great live music experiences. Was there any ones that favorites that stand out at you?
I think I mean there was a whole plethora of stuff which we saw,
Yeah.
but I think that we saw the Isley Brothers in concert in New York, in Brooklyn, in a
Okay.
part of Brooklyn, which these days it's probably quite nice, but back then it was pretty sketchy.
Sure.
But it was amazing, and we got opened up when we saw that. Is what happens a lot in America in the summertime is really big legacy artists they still do this. They have a lot of free concerts for people in the inner city in America in the
Okay.
summertime. So that was amazing. We saw Buddy Guy in a similar sort of vibe, and what basically people turn up with their, hampers and their beers and their snacks and refreshments, and they sit down,
Yeah.
have a picnic, and they watch like an amazing, famous artist from 30, 40 years ago. Yeah, so we saw that was a lot of fun. We saw Alicia Keys. She was great. She was like on her first tour. Um, but I think looking back, one of the most special gigs actually was one of the most intimate was a guy called Bobby Bluebland,
Okay.
who did a song called "Ain't No Love in the Heart of the City," and he had this. I think he was called the King of the Blues. I think that's one of his monikers. We saw him in a 200, maybe 100 person venue in Nashville,
Sure.
in Printers Alley. And I mean, he's now passed away. It was a long time ago, but it was just that was the real setting for that sort of music, and that's where that music lives, is
Sure.
in those sorts of clubs.
Of course.
And we saw that, and it was amazing. And I mean, it was such a long time ago, but I do remember it at the time being like, wow, he had a great band, and it was like it was just a real special thing. And it was only like subsequently that we sort of really fully understood his legacy. And we're like, we saw him. Like, it's like seeing someone like James Brown in a hundred
Sure.
person thing. If I was a little bit older, I've got friends of mine who saw James Brown when he came over to play places like the Wag Club in Soho, but
Sure.
you know, if I've got to be 15, 20 years older than I am for that to have been the case. So it was quite special, and we were really aware that what we were watching was something which was, in general, with a lot of these people, especially the legacy artists, was like this was probably near the very end of their careers, and they weren't necessarily. Having said that, the Isley Brothers are still going. Buddy Guy is still going.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but it was just very interesting and being like, wow. I mean, also the other thing is New Orleans in general has some of the and Austin has some of the greatest live acts you'll ever see.
Incredible.
And they're playing covers, and they're just guys who bet day in day out play on Bourbon Street.
Yeah. No.
Um, so
Yeah.
and the real players know this, like the big guys, and these guys might be playing on Bourbon Street for 5, 10 years, and then suddenly they're on tour with someone, big.
Yeah, it makes me think of that, like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where you do get a lot of big name people going doing performances and shows, but you get hundreds of little shows, and people performing who've never heard of, but then maybe the next big one. And I guess it's like that with yours. You see the big name acts, and then you see small name performances, which can be amazing, but
Absolutely,
also
absolutely. It's I mean, also one of the most surprising acts we saw were the Dukes of Dixieland.
sure.
Um,
Okay.
and the Dukes of Dixieland were playing on a paddle steamer,
Okay. Wow.
um,
That's great.
and called the Steamboat Natchez in New Orleans. And we basically thought this was going to be really naff,
Sure.
just because it was like a tourist trap. We thought, well, this isn't going to be very good.
Sure.
But we'll go along, we'll have a jazz cruise, have some drinks, have some fun.
Yeah.
And we watched them, and they were absolutely phenomenal. And we were blown away, and absolutely, like, we were just showing how wrong we were. But we ended up chatting to a guy called Everett Link,
Okay.
who had been in quite a big trio in New Orleans in the 1960s and 70s. And a lovely guy, and explained loads of stuff to us, lots of musical theory which we didn't know about. He was the bass player. And it turned out the Dukes of Dixieland they'd basically been one of the big acts of the 60s, 50s, and 60s of the blues, of the trad jazz revival. But they'd worked with Louis Armstrong, and yeah, they were great. They were amazing. And it turned out as well, even funnier than that, my brother had in Edinburgh had at this point was a university there, but he had a funk band, and
Okay.
he had a trombone player who was from Australia, and the
Okay.
trumpet
Wow.
player in the Dukes of Dixieland was Australian.
No.
And he said, "Oh, you're from you live in Edinburgh. I've got a buddy who is a trombone player who
Uh,
lives in Edinburgh now." And he's like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, he's from Australia. He used to play with like Ray Charles and people." He said, "It's not Chris Grieve, is it?" He went, "Yeah."
oh,
And
that's so
we
incredible.
were suddenly like, immediately it was like, thousands of miles away, and we met
It's
someone who, was a very good friend or one of Jeremy's bandmates. Just shows
Incredible.
you how small the world is, you know.
It is.
Uh,
No, it's those crazy moments where it shows me that yeah, it's a huge world, but actually the weirdest coincidence when we meet people like
Absolutely, and I think what I also felt very much was like, don't judge a book by its cover, in so much as like you don't never know what you're going to see in terms of great stuff, and you think, oh, it's not going to be very good, but actually it's brilliant, you know.
I
So
guess it reflects perhaps the traveling um sort of ethos of you never know what's quite going to happen when you travel, full of unexpected moments, and you have to be open to where you visit, where you stay, the people you meet, the spirits you have. You never got to be open minded to.
absolutely, and it's really lovely when you have those unpredictable moments. I think possibly one of the problems with the modern day is that a lot of that unpredictability is gone, because we're sort of able to, we know what's coming up.
What prompted you to write the book when you wrote it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and basically what happened was, so I photographed the whole thing 20 odd, I went around with a 35mm camera, copy of a Minolta, and when I came back, I didn't know how it was going to look, and my brother had sort of suggested, then rather than putting ourselves in the focal point of the photographs, he said, why don't we make the car the focal point, which we dubbed Rufus, just
Yeah.
out of I don't
What
even
was it
know.
again? I mean, how did you choose the
Yeah,
name?
yeah, it was cool. Well, we were asked by these two girls from Florida, what's the name of the car, the first day we bought it, and I just said instinctively Rufus, and my brother replied the Mighty Rufus, and I think that it just felt like the right name for it.
Sure.
But there's Rufus and Shaka Khan were they're a great band. There's Rufus Thomas, who was a singer.
Yeah.
Um, that song "Walk the Dog." But also, I say it in the book. I say maybe I was influenced by Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because they're always
Yeah.
like Rufus.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of '90s kid coming out there. But it just felt like the right name, and
Sure.
it was nice to give it a name, a character.
Yeah.
Where did that come that I started writing the book? Well, I had these photographs, and when I got back, I looked at the photographs, and I was like, wow, these are pretty amazing, actually. So there's one is behind you here, and there's one
Mm.
here, for example. And they suddenly, I was like, I went straight to art school when I got back, and subsequently went off to architecture school. And I never really felt like I had the right space or knew the right people at that point to do a proper exhibition. I didn't just want to put the pictures up in a coffee
Sure.
shop. So I was like, well, okay, I'm gonna, as and when the opportunity comes. And then we had all these amazing stories, and we never wrote them down. And we had them, they were just on the tip of our tongues. And for years, my brother and I dined out on these stories that are going around America
Sure.
and all the crazy stuff which happened. And then about 5 years ago now, my brother said to me, he said, you need to do something with those photographs. It's almost been 20 years, since,
Sure.
you've kept them in the drawer really for, a few people had seen them, but
Yeah.
not. And then I met a guy I was running a club night in London, and started chatting to this guy, and it turned out he worked in art. And I told him what I'd been up to. I said, I've just gone and scanned all these pictures. And they're all 35mm, and I'm now at the point where I want to do an exhibition. And he's like, oh, great, awesome. Well, let's talk about it. So I went and showed him the stuff the following week properly, had them all printed out. And he listened to the stories. Because each picture had a story, and he's like,
Sure.
wow, these stories are amazing. Like, he's like, he said to me, you need to write 1,500 words per city.
Sure.
And then let's talk about doing an exhibition. He was running a sort of online art gallery. And it turned out his father was David Bailey. So
Okay.
that's quite, so it's
Wow.
quite interesting, because
Mm.
he had a very particular perspective and sort of understood the nostalgic aspect of it. And anyway, his name's Sasha, and Sasha inspired me basically. And then COVID hit,
Mm.
and I got ill with COVID, and I was bad for about 2-3 months. And it gave me a time when I was recovering to focus on writing, and I started to write. And then the words just kept coming, and I was like, actually, this isn't really just a this isn't just like a about 1,500 words per city. This is a whole, this is a whole book. And
Sure.
I also felt as well that what was required was I needed to explain the background to where we were and to what we were talking about, and that required like explaining the musical history as well as just telling our story of going around
Of
America,
course.
because going around America is fun and it's interesting and that's great in itself, but it's really the context with which we see that, and how that, why are we going to these places, and what does that place have, who's played there, what's the musical culture there, and
Yeah,
there's a whole
no,
lot of
definitely.
stuff, and it's deep, and you go, well, actually, this is really interesting stuff. And I've always said to people, well, why did you write the book? And I said, well, to connect the dots, really, because to me, music is like a big tree, and like there are a few things which are right near the bottom of the roots and some are in the in the trunk, but not everyone necessarily knows what connects what to what to what,
I,
and you might sort of have an understanding, but not, and I'm not saying that I have a better understanding of other people, but I have had an opportunity to go around America and see things from a very different perspective than someone who's never been round to these places. And I say in the book, um, most British people who go to America go to one of like two or three places. They go to New York, Los Angeles, and Orlando,
sure.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Like the bit in the middle, like there's a few people who've been to New Orleans. Maybe some have gone to Chicago for work, but most people have never gone into the Midwest and wouldn't dream of going to the Midwest.
It's a
So
big place, but
it's a
I
big place,
was,
and it's got a lot of history, and it's got a lot of
yeah,
interesting history, which is also in, intrinsically linked to Britain as well, and our history within that. So there's a lot of stuff there, which I think is fascinating.
do you have, is there a tended audience in that sense, or do you?
I think, yeah, I mean, what it's an interesting one. I think that, yeah, I mean, fundamentally, probably the music. So I detail essentially music from 1920 to 2000. I stop at
Sure,
2002 because in my mind, I'm like, well, that we didn't listen to that music because it didn't exist. So
sure,
um, I don't think it makes sense within the context of the story to go beyond 2002. Also, I think music's quite has actually shifted in popular music quite a lot actually, but at the same time, no, I think that people, obviously it's going to appeal to people over a certain age. Obviously, sounds like a terrible pejorative, but like the boomers are into this stuff. It's all about the blues, it's about rock and roll, it's about stuff which they grew up, which was their youth music. But I think what's interesting, what you have now in terms of musical appreciation and the way that people approach stuff from the past, is that there's been lots of studies into this. Is that because of Spotify, the young people are able to obsess over one particular artist, and I loved it and I love the sound. And I think about that, the music which I heard on vinyl was a thing which really made me go, wow.
sure.
Um, but I think what's interesting is that actually the great thing about vinyl is vinyl has amazing liner notes. So
Sure.
you can obsess about something. You pick up, it's a whole thing, pick it up, you look at it, it's got lots of stuff to read about. Um, and you get really into it and you read all the lyrics and everything. The experience of Spotify doesn't do that. So
No,
what you end up doing is you end up going to Wikipedia or Instagram or Google Images, and you start reading about these people, and you get together that thing. But what's different with that is you're curating that experience,
sure.
and it's whereas with vinyl, it's curated by the artist or the record company. But I think that with the book, I think the interesting thing is I think with the young kids or the kids under 30, they actually find it interesting because it's talking about stuff, but they're like, oh wow, I didn't know this, and I want to know more about this particular artist or this thing. But I've never really necessarily seen it like this all together into one thing. So I do think actually anyone who's interested in music will find it interesting. Um, but yeah, those people also there is an aspect of travel in there. I try to bring in a social commentary to the whole
Sure.
book. So
Yeah.
it is me talking about America and where America is or America was
Sure.
and where it's going. So it's sort of pop culture non-fiction, which
Sure.
is really popular. You know, there's lots of things about geography. People love those books all about geography, and there's all sorts of different examples of those types of topics which people love. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people find it interesting. I haven't it's not written intentionally like a pure travel log as such,
No.
you know.
No. No.
Um,
Definitely.
and I've also kept it's not too academic at all.
Sure.
A friend of mine pointed out that it's written for a 15 or 16-year-old child in terms of the writing style, um,
I
which
think
I'm fine.
that's.
Yeah,
No, I think.
I'm
I
like,
think. I. Yeah. As a writer myself in copyright, they often say, write for write for a 12-year-old,
yeah,
because that's that anyone the audience will understand it. Then always write for the lowest, like,
yeah,
level of understanding. That's the best.
absolutely. And I tried not to be too intellectual or to put, if I was going to put forward an intellectual point, I put it forward in a
Sure.
way that was clear and
Sure.
not convoluted. I mean, when I went
Yeah.
to university, I remember reading other people's essays and just being like, I just can't understand
Sure.
a word of these. Like, I don't understand what this is all about. But the architecture world's a bit like that.
Yeah.
It's art in general. Some people are brilliant at doing that very, very intellectual
Sure.
language.
Do you see yourself ever writing another book in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the next book I had an amazing experience in Brazil, quite fascinating experience about 10 years ago, and that's a shorter book, but in many ways more incendiary.
Is it
And
is it music theme again, or
not,
travel,
no,
or
it's
something?
not, not, no, no, not
No?
really. I mean, there obviously is aspects. I was over there. My brother was actually over there. He was living over there. I went over there. I did play music over there, but it
Sure.
wasn't made my story interesting. It was nothing to do with music as such.
Okay.
So actually, it's a completely separate departure. But I'm in the process. I've just been trying to get, I put this book together. I've been promoting it
Sure.
and finding that time to go right. I'm going to spend time and get on with it. I'm not quite there yet.
Well, they always say that the first one's the hardest. Like,
It's one of those things you just got to do it. You could get on with it and do it. And I think quite frequently with a lot of things in life, one procrastinates, and
yeah.
for good reason. I think as a creative person,
Sure.
procrastination isn't always necessarily you're being idle as such. It's
Yeah.
just that you're trying to work out what do I want to say and how do I do it. But some people can be, you know, paralyzed by procrastination. So
I think writing a book it takes a lot of discipline. It's I've got a friend who's just been writing a book for last year and just getting it published, and I think it's that process of you have to commit to writing a certain amount regularly. Did you find that process, was it a hard process? Something like getting those good habits and doing that? Was it something that?
I got into some. Actually really enjoyed a lot of that process. I mean,
Sure.
like I lived in Barbados for 9 months, which was
Sure.
during the pandemic. I was quite lucky. I got made redundant, and I went and lived in Barbados. My brother
Sure.
was living over there. He was playing music, and he said, "Look, come over." Um, and I'd written quite a lot of it by the time I got there, but I added a lot more to it, and I got into a
Sure.
process where, yeah, I was quite lucky. I was in a situation where I was able to surf every day,
Sure. Well.
and I had some money from the redundancy, so I wasn't worried about necessarily working at that point. But it meant that I had freedom and I had my own space, and I'd
Okay.
get up in the morning, go for a surf, and then I'd come in and I would, write for 2 or 3 hours. But then later on, when I got back to UK, because I did a lot of editing as well, I'd often, I interestingly found that the mornings you're super productive, like,
Sure.
or I'd write in the evening till late, and I'd just go off and write till 1, 2 in the morning. And
Sure.
then I'd go to sleep tired, but I'd wake up at 7, 8 in the morning, have a coffee, and I'd read back on what I'd read and made the corrections. And I think yeah, there's just loads of different ways of doing it, but
Sure.
I think that, yeah, you've got to get into a routine. I felt like I got into a good routine of getting on
Sure.
with it. I didn't really that suffer too much of like
Sure.
writer's block or anything.
Oh,
I
that's
think it
good.
was easier because it was a real story. It had
Yeah.
happened to me. LosingEldorado.com is where I'm doing it. I'm actually in the process of right now. I'm doing the audio book for the Losing
Okay.
Eldorado. I've realized that that's really the way forward. But yeah, it's you can buy it on Amazon, Kindle. You know, you can read it online, or you can buy the physical copy, one of these. I also have a photographic book as well, which has all the photos in it. That's shaped like a vinyl.
I love that. Nice.
And yeah, on losingeldorado.com, it's all there. And people can download, order the book. I like I think the physical thing's great. It's got pictures, it's got photographs, you know, some of the photographs in it. And at the back, it's got all the songs. I referenced 450 songs in the book.
That's incredible.
And that's all on Spotify, so people can read the book and they can listen to the Spotify playlist at the same time. But in the next few months, I will have the audiobook out because I know that a lot of people will listen to things that way. It's how they ingest books these days. It's not reading. Not as many people read as one would hope.
It's true. Well, so losingeldorado.com is the website.
Yeah.
Okay, so do check out the website losingeldorado.com for updates there. The book's on Amazon. Definitely try and get Mark back on the show. Please do subscribe at Seeking TV. Got lots of interviews coming up with other great authors who will share their stories, their books, and their inspiring journeys on the show. So Mark, yes, just thank you for your time and thank you for sharing, you know, this fantastic book you've written and your musical experience and some of your, you know, what's driven you and your passion in writing this book and the journey you had. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to coming back again.